Geez, now I really feel well.
Hi, dear. How are you?
We hear you. I wrote you out this little script.
Why don't you do faster?
To welcome everybody who's watching live. We actually have been broadcasting this live.
Okay.
So they're actually on the internet.
Shall do.
So if you could make next one, I
I love you for adding one more thing to my plate unexpectedly. Because,
you're good at that. So
okay, well, pray for you tonight.
Chris, what's your
I
time?
agree with you.
No, next week.
I mean, I got 3 meetings.
Yeah, me too. I didn't even think about it. Next one. Christmas time. Yeah.
Yeah, he
I know, now I got, if I had time, I'd run home.
Yeah. It's good.
It's funny because,
You've had worse days.
oh, sure.
Yeah, man. Councilman Underwood,
Yes, ma'am.
you ready?
Sure.
Councilman Brodnicki. Good evening, Penn Hills. It being 7:03, we are going to call this first budget hearing 2019 minute meeting to order. I'd first like to say welcome everyone here and welcome everyone who's watching live. We are on the new Penn Hills TV channel and on YouTube. Did I say that right? All right, I'm trying to read from a script, so I'm not going to fake my teleprompter here tonight. So welcome everyone who's watching us live. We are so glad that you are tuning in because tonight is a very important night as we discuss what's going to be happening in 2020. Tonight is a night that you are going to be putting your input on the floor, and we thank you for coming. So on that note, I want to say again that this is the first budget hearing meeting of 2019. The mayor is not here this evening. However, she will be present for the second budget hearing meeting that's scheduled for Monday, December 16th, 2019. I have a few announcements from the mayor. One, Mayor Sarah Kuhn will be making appointments to the various boards at the December 16th, 2019 council meeting. She also wants you to know that if there is someone who desires to serve on any board, to please submit your resume to our business manager 1 week prior to that meeting. The mayor is also seeking for the removal of Tyler Tomasino from the Economic Development Board, and she's seeking his resignation immediately. Finally, the mayor would like you to know she will receive tonight's meeting minutes and my notes, along with the rest of the council and our manager. She will review every noted comment and address all of the comments at the second budget hearing meeting. I would just like to explain to everyone how this current administration has run the budget hearing meetings in the past. And we will continue to do the same in this manner tonight for the 2019 budget hearing meeting. Mayor and council have received the manager's proposed budget as presented. We realize it needs some work before voting on it. There are 3 budget hearing meetings that are scheduled and described as follows. The first budget hearing meeting dated today, Monday, December 2nd, 2019. This meeting is for you, the residents, to voice your concerns and your comments. The manager, the deputy mayor, and council will be taking notes, but we will not be making comments, giving responses tonight. This date is set specifically for residents to comment. The second budget hearing meeting, dated for Monday, December 16th, 2019, the manager, mayor, and council will respond to all public comment made on tonight. Working together on this budget, we can make this budget work and keep us moving forward in the right direction. The third budget hearing meeting, dated for Monday, December 30th, 2019, we will come together to vote on the budget and pass it. And with that being said, I have a text from the mayor, and I am going to read what she asked me to read.
We must be all fired.
The mayor has reviewed the context of political cartoon and expressed her concern regarding contents, seeing no reason for it to have been made public. Personal comments are just that, they are personal. Everyone has a right to support whom they choose to vote for. And you should have used better judgment regarding the comment. This type of behavior is uncalled for. It serves no purpose. It is hurtful and harmful and cannot be acceptable behavior for an appointed official. Therefore, I am seeking for the resignation of Tyler Tomasino from the Economic Development Committee effective immediately. Also, she is asking us to remember to keep the ethics resolution table into our next meeting. So Scott, can you please make sure that that's on the agenda for the December 16th meeting, please? Okay, with that being said, remember, something on tonight, as I know all of you have many comments. I know that you have many opinions on the budget, and as you should. This is your municipality, you live here, it's your wallet, and you ought to monitor how we're spending your money. So just remember, we only have so much revenue coming in. We all have dreams and opinions of what we want our municipality to be. Sometimes we have to keep dreaming until our dreams become reality. Our reality is, again, we only have so much revenue coming in. To put something in, we need to take something out or raise our taxes. So let's just be realistic, let's work together, and with that in mind, let's get started. Can we all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Stephanie, roll call, please.
Mayor Kuhn. Mr. Petrucci.
Here. Here.
Mr. Underwood.
Here.
Mrs. Sapp.
Present.
Mr. Brodnicki.
Here.
All right, at this time, we are going to welcome everyone who has comment or opinion with regard to the budget to come to the podium. What did I skip? Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to turn it over to the manager now to give us a brief budget overview. Scott.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here in our first of three budget hearings. What I'm going to present tonight is really intended to be a broad overview of our 2020 spending plan that was presented to Mayor and Council. And so in the interest of time, I'm going to try to get through it as quickly as I can, but share with you the highlights, if you will, of next year. The first slide shows essentially some of the pressures that we were under on the left-hand side, budgetary pressures that we had in producing a balanced budget in 2020, some of which might seem familiar to you from last year. You'll notice that we also have next year another increase in the garbage contract. You remember last year we went through a contract with Republic that increased costs significantly, and while most of those costs were realized in 2019, there's still a little bit of an increase that we're having next year. The majority of the increase that they had in their contract came into effect in 19, but there's still some increase next year as well. We also have contractual wage obligations that range from 2 to 3%, increased capital funding needs, everything from police cars to ambulances and everything in between. And also because of a leap year next year, we have an additional payroll that has added on to our general expenses that there's really not much we could do about, quite honestly. So as a way to mitigate and balance some of those budgetary pressures, you'll see on the right-hand side some, if you will, some good news, if you will, and things that we are doing and proposing in next year's budget to try to make a balanced budget. I'll start with the bottom one first. You know, we were fortunate enough to receive a $3 million paving grant from PennDOT, and so normally we would be budgeting a lot more for paving, but because we're getting that grant, we don't have to budget as much out of the general fund. So we're using the state's money to pave for the next 3 years, and we're matching it. So that was a little bit of a savings that we were able to take on the operating side. We're still kicking in our share of paving next year, but we're not having to fund the whole amount because the state is helping us with that the next 3 years. So that helped our budget. Also, we have to rely on that fund balance carryover, which there's going to be a little bit additional discussion about as we go. Also, a proposed stormwater management fee is another way in which we're projecting to take in a little revenue next year to help balance the budget. We think that a $5 stormwater fee would generate about $300,000. And out of that fund, we're hoping to reimburse the general fund with about $150,000. Also, because the building sale didn't close this year, we're expecting the closing date on the sale of the old municipal building would be next year. So we could show that on our books as a revenue next year for the whole sales price. So that helped the budget a little bit. Also, I've proposed the elimination of certain non-union administrative benefits that were associated with post-employment at Penn Hills. That is actually a savings, and we're working through a process right now that actually helps our budget. Moving on to where our revenue comes from. This is basically a slide of some of the biggest revenues in Penn Hills. Our fund balance carryover, it comprises about 9% of our revenues, if you looked at it that way, followed by 31% of the budget's comprised of real estate taxes. Another 44% is what I would call Act 511 taxes. Those are basically wage taxes or some business privilege taxes, but the majority of our budget, not surprisingly, is made up of real estate taxes and wage taxes. What's left, as you can see, are relatively small percentages of where we derive our revenue from. Anything from the cable franchise fees, ambulance fees, state shared revenue, that's basically state aid for pensions. So even though we get that money in, it basically goes out the other side when we pay our MMO. And then all other revenue. So when you look at our budget, and this is not dissimilar from anywhere else in municipality in this state. 83% of our revenue comes from two places: real estate taxes and wage taxes. When we look at the expense side of our budget to see where every dollar of the general fund goes, that's what this slide explains. Administrative costs of the budget are about 1%. Finance, that would be essentially including tax collection that's done, and the commissions that we pay Keystone along with the office staff. Information technology budget is 1% of our budget. This is not capital, by the way. This would be the operating. This is not including cost of capital whenever we would buy computers and so forth. That would be out of our capital budget. Police department is 30%, which is typical for municipalities. It's very typical that a third of your operating budget would actually be dedicated to police service. It's not uncommon. Fire services, that's not capital, that includes the contributions we make to the volunteers, that includes the cost of the fire marshal's office, is about 2%. EMS 6%, code 2%. That's refuse and recycling. That's what we pay Republic. DPW, including the money for paving that comes out of the general funds, about 10% of our budget. The library contribution that we make and our portion of it that we share with RAD is about 2%. The senior center comprises about 2% as well. And then we have our debt. Our general obligation bonds comprise about 13% of the budget. But before moving on, I just wanted to say that with respect to the senior center, about 1/3 of what we pay for the senior services comes back to Penn Hills in the form of a grant from the county. The county Department of Aging gives us about 1/3 of our cost. And that's true with EMS too. The EMS expense is about 6% of our total expenses, but on the other side of that, as we saw on the last slide, there's a revenue that's associated with that as well. All other expenses are about 20% of the budget. One of the things that has been happening in Penn Hills, and it's continuing today, is that when we make our budgets, the expenses that we're programming in and projecting are projected to be bigger than the revenues. That's an unsustainable practice, quite frankly. So when we look at our projected budgets and our projected revenues and expenses, going back to at least 2014, you'll see the red column represents the projected expenses, and the blue column represents the projected revenues. So at least for some time, when we've been doing our budgets, we are projecting out to spend more than we take in. And so you may ask the question, where does that money come from? If you project to spend more than you derive in revenue, it has to come from somewhere. And where it comes from is our fund balance. And there has to be some discussion and understanding of what we mean when we talk about our fund balance. And a fund balance is here's a fancy way of telling you what it is. It's the term used to describe the difference between assets and liabilities. It's the total accumulation of operating surpluses and deficits since the beginning of a local government's existence. So if a local government has a surplus, it adds to the fund balance. If a local government has a deficit, it diminishes the fund balance. And one tool that local governments have is to use their fund balance as a way to balance their budget by carrying over and carrying forward their fund balance. And that's not uncommon. It's very common to use fund balance as a method of balancing a budget. It's done in approximately 40% by some surveys that GFOA has conducted. About 40% of all local governments in the nation at one time or another have used fund balance carryover to balance their budget. What's happened in Penn Hills, and why I'm calling attention to it, is the fact that we're carrying over the entire fund balance every year, and at the same time that we're doing that, the fund balance is beginning to get smaller. So every year that we are using that fund balance carryover, and we're essentially deficit spending, that fund balance gets smaller and smaller, and eventually you can imagine that if that continues, there's not going to be a fund balance to carry over. As you can see, the GFOA says that continued dependence on fund balance will eventually weaken the financial stability of the jurisdiction. This slide shows the fund balance according to our audited financial statements all the way back to 13 up through 18. We don't have our 2019 books closed yet, so that's an estimate. We're estimating our fund balance to be $3 million at year-end 19, and then we're estimating under this budget that our fund balance would be about $2 million at year-end 2020. So this graph represents our fund balance from 2013 to 2020. So that's where we're at. And so next year, we're taking that $3 million fund balance as a carry forward to pay the bills. But when we do that, that fund balance at the end of 20 is going to be smaller than what we started with. Another feature of the proposed budget is the proposed establishment of a stormwater management fund. If you don't know what stormwater management is, I don't know that you might have just moved to Penn Hills, because anybody that was here in July knows what a big problem that is. We do not have a dedicated funding source to pay for stormwater improvements. Our Department of Public Works does a very good job of trying to keep up with those things, but whenever we spend money on managing stormwater, redirecting stormwater, there's no specific fund for that to come out of. That all comes out of the expense of the general fund. So what I've proposed to the Mayor and Council is a flat $5 per quarter fee that's assessed on homeowners and businesses to help offset the cost associated with stormwater management. As I alluded to earlier, we believe that fee would generate about $300,000 in year one. Now, out of that $300,000, we would only take $150 into the general fund. We would leave $150 there to start to build up the fund. The goal would be to begin to build up a stormwater fund to reimburse the general fund as we go. How that would work would be we would implement a new $5 stormwater fee at the same time that we would enact a $5 reduction in the sewer charge. So it would be a separate line on everyone's bill. It's not taking money from the sewer fund. it would be a new $5 fee as a separate line on that bill, and at the same time, the sewer charge would go down to $20. And the funds would go into a new separate stormwater fund. And as I said already, we're projecting that we would reimburse about $150,000 of expenses. So you can understand that by establishing that fund and then being able to draw from it to reimburse the general fund, that helps the general fund by $150,000. And I don't have the exact amount, but I can tell you there's a heck of a lot more than $150,000 worth of work that we could do on stormwater in Penn Hills. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I think our public works director would tell you that I don't want to say the sky is the limit, but we have a lot of stormwater issues in Penn Hills, and anytime that you do anything underground, you're getting into spending a lot of money. It's not totally dissimilar from sanitary lines. So with all that said, and to try to give you a broad overview of where we're going, especially with respect to the fund balance and the position we're in, it starts to beg the question as to, well, where do we go from here? Under this budget, I'm explaining that I think Penn Hills needs to identify at least $1 million in annual savings to start to grow the fund balance. That's a big number. Even though our budget's $30 million, $1 million of any kind of savings is a lot of money. That isn't the kind of money that's going to take some real planning on our part. Which is why I'm recommending in 2020 we begin some data-driven recommendations to council on expenses, looking at every department. We've already started that. The finance director and I, working with every department, plan to come back with some data-driven expense reductions, rather than just simply expense reductions for the sake of expense reductions. We really need to go through department by department, anywhere that we can support with data, recommendations to council at the end of this year, expense reductions that we could take in 21. We've already begun that, as I said. We've reviewed, and I've reviewed some programs that were attached to management and administrative personnel, post-employment costs that I've recommended we eliminate. Those are real costs that have a real savings to municipality. And part of this really leads into a discussion about strategic planning. There was some discussion in the past about applying to Pennsylvania has a program through the DCD called the Early Intervention Program. What they found was no one was applying for that money at the state. And the reason no one was applying for the money was because it sounded bad. It sounded like, well, you wouldn't apply to that because there must be some financial crisis. And that's really not the case. We don't really have necessarily a financial crisis in Penn Hills, but what we have to do is be cognizant of where our finances are and where we're heading, and make efforts to plan for the future. So one of the recommendations that I'm going to be making is that we apply to what's now called the Strategic Management Planning Grant. The name of the program changed earlier this year from Early Intervention to Strategic Management Planning Program. And basically what that would do is the state would help fund a consultant to help Penn Hills with a multi-year financial plan that would include long-term and short-term objectives. So I think that's another thing that we could probably take advantage of. And then obviously, when we talk about budgets, we have to look at revenue too. And that's something that down the road we may have to look at. But I say new revenue only because of the fact that if you looked at our first slide, there really is no new revenue. All new revenue, all of our revenues derive from two places. We have real estate taxes and we have Act 511 taxes. So when we say new revenue, when we talk about additional revenue in Penn Hills, just like any other municipality, you're really looking at those two things. So, but I think before we would get there, I think we really need to look at some expense side changes and adjustments as well. So that was intended to be a brief overview of next year's spending plan. So hope it was informative.
Thank you so much to our business manager, Scott, for that brief overview. And with that being said, with our new elect mayor coming on in 2020 and our two new council people, councilmen-elect Getz and Councilman-elect Pecora. I hope that you all have had a chance to really go through this budget with a fine-tooth comb, because the budget that we are going to be working with and passing is the budget that you're going to have to be working with. Just myself and Councilman Petrucci are the only two seated up here tonight who will be voting on this budget that you're going to be working with in 2020. So if you haven't had an opportunity to go through this budget in its entirety, I suggest that you do. Any questions that you have tonight, this is not only your night, but it's all of your night. So tonight is dedicated for your questions and your comments. This is very crucial. As you can see from the slides, Penn Hills is on a downslide, and we have to work to fix that. This is not a time for you to worry about your friends and positions. This is not a time for you to worry about anything other than the budget and where we can save money and where we can go from here to bring ourselves back up again so that we can be a strong municipality. All right, with that being said, I'm going to ask for public input. Please come up to the podium, state your name and address. Please speak clearly and slowly, because Councilman Petrucci and myself, we will be looking down a lot today because we're going to be taking very detailed notes so that the next budget hearing meeting will be able to respond to your comments this evening.
William Jeffcoat, 11420 Clematis Boulevard. The Fire Chief, Penn Hills number 7, also representing the 6 fire departments here tonight. At the August 2019 council meeting, Mayor Kuhn addressed citizens and council members requesting that the 2020 fire suppression budget have, and I quote, some form of additional funding for our volunteer fire companies, end quote. Later during that meeting, I addressed Mayor and Council about the future needs of the fire departments, specifically firefighter personal protective equipment and apparatus replacement. I outlined that the 2019 budget had a $107,000 line item that was being used to pay off a loan for fire department self-contained breathing apparatus. At the June 2019 council meeting, Mayor Kuhn updated citizens in attendance that night that the municipality had refinanced, and I quote, 2008 bonds and 2011 Series B, end quote. Initial estimates reported that this would net the municipality $230,000, when in fact it brought in $320,000 back to the general fund just from refinancing bonds. The 2020 budget finds the elimination of staffing for the police division, necessarily the traffic division, allowing $97,168.03 back to the general fund, while also the reduction in police investigation division staffing by 1 returns $99,597.26. With employees retiring from the finance division and hiring new employees at new starting salaries, that alone was projected $270,279.47 for the 2020 budget. Now we'll do the math together. $107,000, which is what was removed from the previous fire budget, was the SCBA loan. The reduction in police staffing, that gives us a total of $196,765.29. The bond refinancing at $320,000. And the finance department salary difference at $270,279.47 for a total savings of $894,044.76. Now, I would recommend each of the council members and everyone in attendance review the proposed 2020 budget very carefully. Look at each division. You will find employees receiving an increase in pay from the previous year. One division employee receiving an increase of $15,375 from the previous year in just one person's salary. Even part-time staffing receives an increase in hourly pay. What divisions will you not find an increase in funding for 2020? The 2020 budget, pardon me. The legislative, which is council yourselves, the controller, and the fire suppression budget. Mayor Kuhn at the November 18th council meeting stated that some comments were made that, quote, "The fire companies should not expect to automatically receive additional funding," end quote. Now, myself, Mayor Kuhn, and the volunteer fire department chiefs and company officers and members seated behind me couldn't disagree with that statement anymore. Whenever our public safety counterparts need modern and up-to-date police equipment, they get it. When our EMS division needs the most modern and up-to-date life-saving equipment, they get it. The 6 volunteer fire companies, with the assistance of the Penn Hills Fire Marshal, have tried numerous federal grants for personal protective equipment and have been unsuccessful at each attempt. The fire chiefs seated behind me collectively have spent hours meticulously designing a personal protective equipment specification with safety, longevity, and cost effectiveness at the top of the list. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, better known as NIOSH, recently undertook 2 large studies focused on firefighter cancer and concluded that firefighters face a 9% increase in a cancer diagnosis and a 14% increase in cancer-related deaths compared to the general public in the United States. Well, maybe council would like to take the approach or the attitude that cancer couldn't happen to our people. Well, I'm sorry to report to each one of you that you're wrong. It already has. 2 members of the Penn Hills Volunteer Fire Department were diagnosed with the same type of cancer, only a few years apart. These courageous individuals were from different stations, had different full-time jobs, but still managed to come down with the identical type of cancer. Fire contaminants expose firefighters to cancer-causing carcinogens and eventually weakens the very gear that's meant to protect us. In an attempt to reduce these risks for all of the Penn Hills volunteer fire departments, 2 years ago, the Penn Hills Fire Chiefs Committee authorized the purchase of a PPE gear washer/extractor. Department members are making every attempt to reduce their exposure risk to cancer while at the same time of extending the life expectancy of our personal protective equipment. The PPE washer extractor is currently housed at Station 223, North Bessemer Fire Department, and every single volunteer firefighter in Penn Hills has access to that facility 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Now, I stress to each of you sitting before me this evening to please demand for funding for firefighter personal protective equipment to be included into the 2020 budget and beyond. Once approved, the Penn Hills Fire Chiefs Committee and company officers will collectively submit our unified bid specification to the Pennsylvania Co-Stars program. The Pennsylvania Co-Stars program provides increased opportunities for suppliers of any size to participate and compete for business while providing contracts with competitive pricing. This process is the most legal and fair way of spending tax dollars. Our Penn Hills volunteer fire departments currently are averaging 286 calls a month. At that current pace, we are set to go for 3,438 calls. That would be an 8% increase from 2018. Those are just preliminary numbers. One snowstorm could increase those numbers tenfold. Our firefighter personal protective equipment just isn't the difference between life and death for the person who wears it. It could mean life and death for the person in the community who needs it to be rescued. Public safety should not be a Democratic issue, should not be a Republican issue or an independent issue. Public safety should be what's right and what's wrong, and not including funding for firefighter personal protective equipment in the 2020 budget and beyond is flat out wrong.
Thank you, Chief.
Faith Milazzo, 121 Castle Drive. I would also like to agree with Chief Jeffcoat there. I do think the firefighters deserve more money. It would be awesome if that money could be found. I mostly have questions, not so much suggestions. As Bill pointed out, there is one fewer traffic officer, although when I looked at the budget, maybe there wasn't even a traffic officer for 2018. I'm not entirely sure. And I'm just wondering, I mean, I don't really want to complain about that because that's better for the budget, but I just am hoping next time maybe that question can be answered. Every budget, for the last few years, I've always suggested perhaps the police could maybe give out more parking fines. I see a lot of parking violations. I know it's very minor. That's not going to bring in $1 million. That's not going to bring in $100,000, but a lot of times I see cars parking under no parking signs, and if that could be enforced, then I don't know if that's police traffic that would do that. That doesn't seem to be available. I don't know. But that's my one comment. I also noticed there's one fewer code enforcement employee, so again, I'm just wondering about that. I feel like as with parking, there are a number of code violations. If you drive around Penn Hills, you do see those, and things take time. So again, not necessarily sad that we have one fewer person on the payroll, but I just am wondering why that is and if this will affect code violations. I did notice back in 2017, Penn Hills brought in about 11,000 in code violations, and this year, I'm not entirely sure I understand amended versus estimate. It's 3,500 for the 2018 budget. Amended and estimate is 5,175, but either way, that's a lot less in code enforcement revenue when just looking around some neighborhoods. I think more money could be gained by that. And I have personally found that code enforcement, I feel like they're pretty generous. They're not out to call up someone and say, hey, you have this violation, you're being fined right away. I mean, my experience has been they work with people. I just wish maybe enforcement could happen at a faster rate. I also have a question. It's about the dumpster thing. I'm just wondering, again, with the amended versus the estimated, the 2018 budget, $500 for amended for the dumpster pod things and $1,700 for the estimated. So I'm just wondering how that's going now that they have that fee that you have to pay to get a dumpster. And my last thing, it's just on Public Works. I'm a fan of a lot of the Public Works events that Penn Hills puts on, the movies and the music. I was really disappointed that we lost Autumn in the Hills. I hope that maybe that can be looked into again to perhaps have a benefit. I don't know if they were missing certain permits or something. I think that's somewhere in the budget, just in general, different events, but I think it's important. It's good for Penn Hills if we can have fun events for people in all ages. And those are my questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Getz, 151 Crescent Hills Road. I went to the trouble of doing quite a line-by-line item search of the budget, and to tell you the truth, this is really not a venue where we can do over that. In order to do this, you would all have to have a copy of my notes and the comments I made. So I just want to highlight a couple of things that I think stood out in my mind. And the rest of it is going to be covered during the year as we look at expenses and other things. The thing that concerned me, and I brought up to council before, is the special pay item. There's overtime pay, there's regular pay, and there's special pay. The first time I asked about special pay, I was told it was overtime. Well, it wasn't overtime. Subsequently, I didn't get an answer. Eventually, I got an answer that says it pays for things like benefits, and I'm not sure what they're all personnel related. But I would like to ask and see this in the budget, that special pay be broken down into its various components. Who's getting special pay and what is special pay for, and check that against the totals. I I'm not going to go through all the questions we raised, but this was handed out to the incoming members of council and the mayor and to all council, and I don't know if you've all had a chance to look at it, but the questions here eventually will be brought up either at council meetings or at budget meetings or just on the job. I'm just going to do a couple here, not the whole thing. Why are the 2019 estimated benefits increasing by 34.2% from the 2018 actuals when salaries are slightly down from prior years? So the benefits are being paid out are going up, the salaries are going down. I don't expect an answer right now, but unless somebody cares to answer it. Did everybody have a chance to look at this, by the way?
Yes, and Mr. Getz, we will not be responding to questions this evening. We will preserve that for December 16th meeting.
All right, thank you. I'll be here.
Thank you, Mr. Getz.
Betty Arndt, 172 Highland Road. I just have a question on the presentation of the personnel for the library listed on page 85. It shows no cuts in the staffing, but for the position of librarian, it shows wages as $0. And I don't think we have anybody working for $0. So I'm just curious at some point if you could answer why that is. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm surprised that we don't have more residents popping up to the podium. This is your time.
My name is Bill Mouts. I live at 1335 Maple Avenue, 15147. Last month's council meeting, there was 2 items that I kind of thought was a want and not really a need. They were quite expensive. I think one was over $24,000 for the first year, and that was to help the police find out what they're legally allowed to do or not do by an outside contractor from New Jersey. I think that $24,000 the first year could be well spent sending it to the fire department and send the police individually to the Greensburg Police Academy to learn anything that might be new. I think they save a lot more money. It'd be a lot cheaper than you're employing people in Pennsylvania, not in New Jersey. I think it's a little ridiculous. The other thing I seen in last month's budget was a lot of money going to be spent for an outside contractor, again, from out of state, to find businesses who might want to come into our community to start up a new endeavor. I kind of think that should be up to the actual owners of those buildings, whoever that might be, whether it's a bank or an individual entity, to advertise with real estate agents out of state themselves. I don't think our municipality, and its dire straits that it's in, needs to be using this money for outside contractors. It's a little dubious whether they're going to actually perform or not perform. So I think those 2 items should be stricken from the budget that save a lot of money and send that money instead to the fire department. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob Mara, 43 Rushmore Drive.
I'm sorry, could you repeat your name one more time?
Bob Mara, 43 Rushmore Drive. It was a very good presentation. You gave an overview. I'm just very curious why you are continuing to rely on the fund balance to balance the budget. You did mention that about 40%, I think it was, of municipalities do this on occasion, I think you said. It seems like it's become a practice here to do that. And I'm on the school board, and I have been there appointed to replace somebody and just got reelected to go on the school board. I was a treasurer for a little while, and I just see that this is on a path to that will be identical to that the school board is. The school board built new schools without having a way to pay for it. They said they weren't going to raise taxes, and they went 5 years without raising taxes, and actually had a tax decrease in one of those years when the county did their reassessment. So the taxes actually went down. Now, the problem with not raising taxes, and I know everybody hates raising taxes, you don't want to look at that, but I think this budget is again proposing not to do that. The problem is that you lose a lot in the compounding of those taxes. And I did a back of the envelope calculation that if Penn Hills School District would have raised taxes at the cost of living, COLA, the cost of living adjustment that Social Security pays for, which is quite small every year, and it has been quite small. If they would have done that during that time frame, and 2 of those years the COLA was 0, so they wouldn't have to raise taxes at all, they would have generated $34 million more in the last 10 years. That would have been enough to wipe out the negative fund balance that Penn Hills has now. Plus, they wouldn't have had to get the $18 million additional loan that they needed to take out for expenses. I think it was in 2014 for everyday expenses. Had to go to court, common pleas court, because you're not allowed to do that in this state of Pennsylvania. And we wouldn't be in financial recovery. So I think it's critical for you to just relook. And I know everybody hates it. Everybody here, if I say raise taxes, everybody say, oh, no, you can't do that. But to raise at what the COLA is, which is everybody who's on Social Security, everybody who's on that are going to get that increase. To raise it at that level may be a way that you can start eating into not having to use that fund balance to balance your budget, because it's something you should do if you need to do it in an emergency. It just seems like you've now made it a practice to do that. And like you said, it's a road to destruction, and it just can't last. So you either got to do some major cuts or increase more revenue. And as you said, revenue comes from 83% or whatever the number was, comes from the local residents.
Thank you.
Becky Finoletto, 232 McAllister Drive. I'm also a cancer survivor. And if these gentlemen are telling you that the equipment that they need will help them to not get cancer for saving all of our lives when there is a fire or another emergency, you need to find this money for these guys and women, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Robert Larko, 304 Hamel Road. Again, thank you for the presentation. That was great.
I didn't hear your name. I'm sorry.
Robert Larko.
Oh.
Bobby Larko. Is it possible for you to put the fund balance schedule up again? Because my questions relate to that. So on this slide, you can see 2019 estimate is $3 million, but in the budget, it's saying that we're using $3 million of the fund balance. How do we get to $2 million in 2020? And the other question I have is in 2019, what revenues and expenditures are being used to get to that $3 million balance, because I use the estimated revenues and expenditures for 2019, because I would assume that that's the latest projection of the balances, not the 2019 budget that was done this time last year, but the estimates, which is the current projection, I'm assuming. If I do that, it gets our fund balance in 19 to 0. So I'm just curious what numbers are being used and if that could be addressed next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Andrea Getz, 151 Crescent Hills Road. I want to ask some of the questions from a document that was given to council, mayor and council today. In the document is called Citizen Review of the 2020 Budget. And it asked a lot of questions and it has a lot of charts in it. I would just highlight some of the features of it. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. The general fund revenues and expenditure trend shows that there is that for a long time, from 2012 to even 2018, expenditures and revenue were closely tied. Revenue was higher, but it was not so high. But suddenly now, in 2019 and 2020, revenue expenditures are soaring. So what's the reason for the spike? That is a big question. The 2019 estimated expenditures of $32 million reflects a year-over-year increase of $2.9 million, or 10%. The 2020 manager's budget, and that the highest dollar increases are in salaries. Salaries are driving this. The 2020 manager's budget of $33 million reflects a year-over-year increase of $808,000, or 2.5%, with the highest dollar increase, again, in salaries. Why, some questions related to that are, why is the overtime expenditure essentially flat when it appears that we've had an increase in staffing in 2019 estimates? And the 2020 budget, shouldn't the increase in staff reduce overtime hours? And some items in the budget, page 12, there's something called leaned real estate. $400,000 is shown as a positive figure. Look at, I don't know if you can look at that. I don't know if this is a mistake. Go to page 12. You see 400,000 next to leaned real estate. All the other ones are just negative numbers, and this one is a positive number. What is Penn Hills collection rate? Do you know? Want to answer next time? Okay. The deed transfer taxes on page 13. There's a 25% decrease. And what happened? What happened that 25% it decreased like that? You must estimate that we're going to continue not selling houses. Is that what that's about? Okay. And on page 45 and 46, there's generally, it's raised in these questions that have been provided, that there are these summary pages, and followed by that are the laid out budget pages. But the summary pages, in most cases, do not match, the numbers do not match the numbers that are provided on the next page. An example would be on this page 45 and 46. There's a secretary wage in there of $47,802. But when you look at the When you look at the following page, it says that the wage is $49,641. There's many circumstances like this throughout the budget. Someone already addressed the librarian situation, where it showed 0 for the librarian on the summary page, but on the next page it showed $67,000 for the librarian. In 2019, salaries increased $500,000. Vehicle expenditures increased $500,000. I'm just throwing it out there. That's not even a question. But a question I have for you is about the sewer budget on page 105. There is a $502,000 increase in sewer, and it is related to, I believe, Alcosan. Maybe Alcosan increases, but only $200,000 is going to be raised to pay for that. So I want to know, why is that the case? How do we make up the deficit there? And I think I want to request an analysis on overtime. If you don't already do this, whenever people submit overtime, do you have an idea of what the overtime was used for? You know, whether it would be monitoring a parade or whether it would be working later. Do you have a record, and can you break that out so you can see where the problem is in overtime expenditures? And then the last point I make is I didn't read all the questions that are in this general fund, general questionnaire. I didn't read them all, but I hope you will address them all when we meet in 2 weeks. Thank you very much.
Andrea.
Thank you.
Andrea, over here. Andrea, question. Which overtime? For the police, DPW? What do you want? All of them.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Pauline Calabrese. My address is 142 Crescent Hills Road. First of all, thank you so much. A lot of work went into the budget. I can see that. Secondly, my question is, I'm not sure whether this is an error or I just don't, maybe I don't understand it. I'm looking at page 12, page 13, and page 15. Mrs. Getz already pointed out that under the estimated 2019 lean real estate column, it is a positive. I too wonder, is that to be a negative? The same on page 13, 2019 estimated, under mercantile taxes.
I can answer that if you want.
Pardon me?
I could tell you that when we did 19, all the revenues, you'll notice in our budget, and we get this question a lot, all of the revenues appear as a credit. In 19, we had those numbers appear as a debit. So our revenue projection for 19 was a little lower than it should have been, but we collected what we collected. But when you look at that 19 number estimated was a little artificially lower because that didn't print as a credit. That's the answer to that.
And that's the same on page 15 then as well?
For 19, yeah.
I'm going to try to keep our manager from answering the questions this evening.
But I think Mrs. Getz and I had the same question, but I saw it in several other places. So thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, is that it? I don't want to, okay, good.
Ron Zarotny, 96 Duff Road. I just wanted to speak on behalf of the firemen. I hear the whistles all the time, and I don't think this community realizes, unless their house is on fire or their neighbor's fire, they have no idea, the general public, is what these guys do, or you know, the expense that they have. You know, I like to suggest, I know the city of Pittsburgh, they put a tax on the library. Everybody in Pittsburgh has to pay. It's not very much, $20, I think, or $25. It's a tax for the libraries in the city. And I know they do that at other communities also. And I don't think that would be a bad idea for every homeowner, or wherever it comes from, but I would say the homeowners, $20, $25 a year, and it would solve a lot of their problems. And I don't think they'll complain because, like I said, the general public has not a clue what these guys do. And if we didn't have those firemen, you know, what would the municipality do? And I don't think they would complain about a small, I hate to say tax, but like the gentleman said, it has to come from somewhere. And for what they do, a little bit of publicity on the tax, I don't think the public would object. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Ike Okolo, Golden Gate Drive. Just 2 points I'd like to make. With all the discrepancies in the data we've looked at, is there going to be an updated material released before council gets to meet? We have so many discrepancies in the documents. Are those going to be corrected before we meet? Will the citizens have a chance to look at those numbers again? And then number 2, I'm against taxes. We need to be able to manage our resources and manage it properly. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to continue to say, is there anyone else who has a comment, concern with regards to the budget? It's your money, it's your municipality. Okay, if we have no further questions, Mayor, Council, and Manager, we will review every comment that was given to us this evening. We will have a response for you on Monday, December 16th, at the next meeting. And as Mayor Sarah Kuhn always says, you may not like the answer, but we will have an answer. I want to thank you so much for coming out this evening to express your concerns. And before we adjourn, there's just a few things I want to remind you of. And that is, on this Thursday, what is that, the 5th? The 5th. This Thursday, December 5th, is Penn Hills Light Up Night. We would love to see everyone in the room. This whole room and outside is going to turn into a winter wonderland. Come up and let's spread some Christmas cheer. Also, I know that Crescent Hills Civic Association has some amazing holiday activities planned. If you don't know what they are, please see one of the Crescent Hill neighbors here this evening so that they can tell you. Raise your hand, Crescent Hills, if you're in the room. Andrea Getz, yes, 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 okay. You can ask them what those activities are. They are amazing activities. It is for every Penn Hills resident, not just for Crescent Hills. Is that correct? So yes, the holiday house tour is on the agenda. That sounds exciting. So I want to welcome you on their behalf to please see one of them to get the dates and times for those activities. It is Christmas. It's a time to be happy and celebrate the holiday. Spread the cheer. So on that note, I'd like to call for an adjournment. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second? All right, Penn Hills, good night. We look forward to seeing you on Monday the 16th. God bless you.
I'll figure it out. Another year. What's that? Mike, take it.